hits you pretty quickly, doesn't it? If you're a parent, especially with newborns, toddlers, you feel that intensity.
Oh, absolutely.
The incredible love, sure, but also the sheer exhaustion, right? And your world just shrinks down to this tiny, amazing, demanding human.
Completely revolves around.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a lot of and somewhere in those sleepless nights, the feeding cycles, maybe all the conflicting advice out there, you might feel a little off, disconnected maybe from your old life, maybe you thought you were, or even just from yourself somehow.
That feeling.
Yeah.
It's potent. And while parenting definitely shines the spotlight on it, it taps into something our sources suggest is, well, pretty widespread.
Yeah, the sense many adults have of being out of touch with what their core self.
Exactly. And as we started digging into this stack of material, research, essays, philosophy expert talks, this really surprising connection started to surface.
Okay.
What if that personal feeling of disconnection isn't just, an individual thing? What if it's tangled up with the way the world is heading?
How so? Like with technology racing ahead, this constant push for profit, for growth.
Precisely that. That's the fascinating link our sources are exploring, and that's really our mission in this deep dive today. To unpack that for you,
Okay.
we're drawing on insights from psychology, neuroscience, trauma research, philosophy, all within these materials to try and understand where this adult disconnection comes from.
The roots of it.
Yeah, the roots, and then trace how it might actually play out in society, maybe even driving some of these big trends. And importantly, look for the practical takeaways.
Especially for parents, right? That's key.
Absolutely. How can understanding this help you, as a parent, maybe see these cycles, maybe interrupt them? For yourself and for your kids. It's really not about blame or judgment.
No.
It's about getting clearer, feeling more empowered to make conscious choices in what feels like a really complex world.
We've definitely got some rich material here. Research findings, psychological ideas, philosophy, expert insights. A lot to weave together.
It is. But that's the goal of the deep dive, isn't it? To synthesize, to cut through the noise and find those core threads.
All right. So let's start with that core idea. This feeling adults have of being disconnected from their true self or authentic self. What do the sources mean by that? It's not like people are being deliberately fake, is it?
No, generally not. It's described more as a sense of not fully knowing who you truly are deep down, or maybe knowing, but feeling unable to really live from that place to express it.
Like there's a gap.
Yeah, a gap between the inner reality and the outward presentation. And our sources use different psychological models to explore this.
Okay.
So if we look at it through a Jungian lens, which comes up a few times, we have concepts like the persona.
The mask.
Exactly, the mask. Or maybe masks, plural.
Yeah.
Different roles we play, the professional self, the parent self, the friend self. They're functional, necessary even, for navigating social life.
Right, you need them to function.
But the catch, according to the sources, is if we over-identify with the persona. If that mask becomes all there is, or all we think there is, it can start to feel hollow, empty.
It's just a front.
Yeah, a front without real substance behind it if it's not connected to the deeper parts of ourselves.
And behind the persona, there's the shadow.
The shadow. In Jungian terms, this isn't necessarily evil or bad. It's the parts of ourselves we've pushed away, repressed, denied. Maybe because they felt unacceptable to our family or society, or just made us feel vulnerable.
Like fears, desires.
Could be fears, desires, anger, insecurity, even positive qualities we haven't owned. It operates mostly unconsciously, but it can really drive our behavior without us realizing it.
Okay, so persona is the front, shadow is the hidden stuff. What's the true self then in this model?
The Jungian self, sometimes capitalized, is described as a totality, the whole picture. It's the potential for wholeness, the integration of the conscious and the unconscious, including the persona and the shadow. It's like the deep, organizing center of who we are.
So it's not just one part, it's the integrated whole.
Exactly. And the journey towards that wholeness, integrated the shadow, seeing beyond just the persona, Jung called that individuation. It's often challenging work.
I bet. Confronting the hidden parts.
Right, and differentiating from the roles we play. It's about trying to align with that deeper sense of who you are, beyond the masks and the repressed bits.
Okay, that makes sense. But there's another concept that seems to work against this integration, right? The ego.
Yes, and some sources, like Julia Christina Counseling, frame the ego in a specific way here. Not just arrogance, but more like a protective shield.
Protecting us from what?
From feeling vulnerable, from shame, from that deep fear of not being good enough. The ego builds defenses to try and keep us safe from those feelings.
Paradoxically.
Paradoxically, yeah. while it's trying to protect us, those very defenses can block genuine authenticity. They stop us from truly connecting, both with ourselves and with other people.
How does it do that?
It often operates with this constant proving energy, as the source puts it. It's always asking implicitly, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Successful enough? Lovable enough?
Ah, that constant striving.
Exactly. It pushes us to seek validation from the outside through achievements, status, approval. It's trying to patch up that inner insecurity with external proof, but it rarely works long term.
Because the core feeling is still there.
Right. Keeps us hustling for worthiness instead of settling into the quiet knowing of the true self, the sense that we're okay as we are.
And this really connects to the idea of the false self, doesn't it? Which feels super relevant to how disconnection starts.
Absolutely. The concept of the false self, developed by Donald Winnicott and discussed in sources like the School of Life video and Heal NPD materials, is described as a really profound, sometimes tragic survival strategy, and it starts very, very early.
How early?
Infancy, early childhood. Picture a baby or a young child expressing a very real, authentic need or feeling. They're hungry, they're furious because a toy was snatched, they're sad, they're bursting with loud joy.
Normal kid stuff.
Totally normal. But if the caregiver consistently can't handle those authentic expressions, maybe they get irritated, they withdraw, they get angry themselves, or they just ignore the child's emotional reality.
The child feels unsafe expressing those things.
Worse than unsafe, the child faces a fundamental dilemma. Their actual survival depends on that attachment bond with the caregiver, but their authentic self feels like a threat to that bond.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. So the child, brilliantly adaptive as children are, senses this intolerance. They learn implicitly, okay, that feeling isn't welcome here. That need is too much.
So they suppress it.
They suppress the authentic feeling or need, and instead they develop ways of being that please the caregiver, that meet the caregiver's needs or expectations. Winnicott called it compliance far too early. The child becomes hyper-attuned, constantly scanning, what do they want me to be? What's acceptable?
And that becomes the false self.
That adaptation creates the false self. It's a personality structure built around external demands and reactions, not around an inner core sense of being. The child survives by becoming what others seem to need, burying the parts that weren't welcomed.
So later in life,
Someone operating heavily from a false self might feel kind of unanchored, empty inside, maybe numb, or like they're just going through the motions. They might be incredibly successful on the outside, great at playing roles, but there's this painful disconnect from a sense of inner vitality, of being real.
it wasn't a choice to be false then.
Not at all. It was a necessary adaptation for survival, for maintaining that crucial connection. It gave form to an inner world that felt too dangerous to reveal.
It's amazing how resilient kids are, but also, what a cost.
The significant cost to their later well-being and sense of self, absolutely.
Okay, so this really sets the stage. This disconnection has deep roots, often starting way back in childhood. Let's dive into that more. How exactly does this wiring happen early on?
Yeah, the sources are really rich here, pulling from trauma research, developmental psychology. One huge framework is adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs.
Right, I've heard of the ACE study.
Therapy in a nutshell, and Big Think discuss it. The original study identified specific types of adversity before age 18, things like abuse, physical, emotional, sexual, neglect, physical, emotional, and also household dysfunction.
Like growing up with domestic violence or substance abuse.
Exactly. Or mental illness, parents separating, someone in the household being incarcerated, things that create a stressful, unstable environment for a child.
And the study found these were surprisingly common.
Shockingly common, even in the middle-class population they studied. But the really groundbreaking part was the link to adult outcomes. The more ACE someone had, the higher their risk for a whole range of negative health issues decades later. 50 years later, the correlation was still powerful and proportionate. We're talking chronic physical diseases, mental health struggles like depression and anxiety, substance abuse, even dying earlier. It was stark proof that childhood experiences get under our skin biologically and shape our lives long term.
50 years later, wow. But it's not just the big T traumas, right? The sources also talk about subtler things, small T trauma.
Yes, that's a really important point from Gabor Mate. He argues we need to look beyond overt abuse or neglect the big T traumas and consider the cumulative impact of situations where a child's core emotional needs aren't consistently met, even in families that seem loving on the surface.
What are those core needs?
Things like feeling loved unconditionally, just for being you, being held and comforted when you're upset, having someone consistently respond to your needs, being truly seen and heard for who you are. And this is crucial, being allowed to feel and express your full range of emotions.
Even the messy ones. Anger, sadness.
Especially the messy ones. Anger, sadness, frustration, fear. If those feelings are consistently ignored, dismissed, punished, or stamped on, as May puts it, because they make the parent uncomfortable, that's a wound.
Even if it's not intentional abuse.
Even if it's not intentional. The message the child receives over and over is, your sadness is too much, your anger isn't allowed, your needs are inconvenient. They learn to suppress those parts of themselves to keep the peace, to maintain the connection. That's the small trauma. Individually small incidents, maybe, but cumulatively, they teach the child that their authentic self isn't fully acceptable.
Which brings us right back to that authenticity versus attachment conflict.
Exactly. Gabor Mate and others emphasize that authenticity, being connected to your body, your gut feelings, knowing what feels true for you, is a fundamental human need. It's vital for navigating the world safely.
But for a kid?
For a kid, the need for attachment, for that bond with the caregiver, is immediate, absolute. It's about survival. So, if expressing their authentic self, maybe a toddler having a meltdown about boundaries, or a child showing sadness consistently leads to the caregiver pulling away, getting angry, emotionally abandoning them, the child learns a terrifying lesson.
Being real. Losing love.
Or at least risking it. Authenticity feels dangerous. So the child system makes a choice. Prioritize attachment. Suppress authenticity. Keep the connection. Lose touch with the self.
And that pattern gets locked in.
It gets locked in.
Yeah.
Authenticity becomes associated with danger, with the threat of disconnection. As May says, no wonder you're afraid to be authentic later on. Your deepest programming tells you it's risky.
That makes so much sense. It's a survival strategy that outlives its usefulness. And these patterns show up in specific ways in adulthood, right?
They do. Cady Morton talks about this with emotional neglect. People-pleasing is a classic one.
Why he's trying to make sure everyone else is okay.
Yeah, often because you got really good at reading other people's moods to stay safe, but maybe never learned how to check in with your own feelings and needs, or struggling to ask for help.
Believing your needs aren't valid.
Or that they're a burden. Maybe getting defensive easily, anticipating criticism if you express a need, and just generally feeling like your emotions are too much. It all echoes that early environment where emotional attunement was missing. The child wasn't consistently seen or validated in their inner world.
And it's not just family. One source mentions society plays a role too.
That's a really important layer, yeah. The essay source points out that even outside of trauma or neglect, our broader culture, especially school systems, often hammers home the importance of external achievement.
Grades, awards, getting ahead.
Right, accumulating knowledge, competing, building that resume. There's far less focus on internal development. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness, figuring out who you are and what you truly value, separate from what society rewards.
So even kids from good homes can end up disconnected.
Yes. They can grow into adults asking, who am I really? What do I actually care about? Simply because the whole system steered them towards external validation and away from inner exploration. The skills for outer success were prioritized over the skills for inner knowing.
And these patterns, they don't just stay with one person, they get passed down.
That's the intergenerational piece, which K.T. Morton, Therapy in a Nutshell, Forrest Hanson all touch on. It's crucial. Patterns of behavior, ways of coping, attachment styles like being avoidant or anxious or disorganized in relationships, which often stem from those early relational gaps, get transmitted, often unconsciously.
Parents repeat what they experienced.
Often, yes, even with the best intentions. If you experience neglect or learn to suppress your feelings, those patterns are deeply embedded in your own nervous system. It takes conscious effort not to replicate them with your own kids.
And there's even a biological component, epigenetics.
Yeah, the research mentioned, like in the Cady Morton materials, is fascinating. Epigenetics shows how our experiences can actually change how our genes are expressed without altering the DNA code itself.
Like the rat study.
Exactly, the famous study where fear of a smell was passed down to offspring who never experienced the original trauma. It suggests a biological pathway for how parental stress or trauma could potentially influence the next generation's vulnerability or resilience, even before they're born. It underscores how profoundly the parent state and the relational environment shape the child.
It's a powerful thought. Our past isn't just past, it's living in us, potentially shaping our kids' biology. Okay, so we've got this picture. Disconnection from the self, rooted in early life, passed down generations. Now the big leap. How does this internal state in so many adults shape the external world? The drive for growth, tech, profit,
Right, this is where the sources connect the dots between the inner landscape and the outer world. The idea is that widespread disconnection, especially when people operate from that false self or are driven by the ego's need for validation, really impacts how we structure society.
How so?
Well, the essay source suggests that people compensating for deep feelings of inadequacy or unlovability feelings, often born in childhood, might be intensely driven to seek external proof of their worth.
Through power, wealth.
Exactly. Power, fame, massive success. For someone whose sense of self was built on pleasing others or achieving externally the false self, getting to the top feels like the ultimate validation. The ego's proving energy goes into overdrive.
Like, if I just achieve this, then I'll finally be enough.
Precisely. If I launch this product, dominate this market, get this promotion, then I'll be worthy, lovable, secure.
Yeah.
But the sources note that feeling is usually fleeting.
Because it doesn't fix the core wound.
Right. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket. So it fuels this cycle of needing more power, more growth, more profit.
Yeah.
Never enough.
And this might be more common in leadership positions.
The essay mentions research suggesting potentially higher rates of narcissistic or sociopathic traits in some top leadership roles. These traits can sometimes be linked back to early trauma or developmental issues that impair empathy and fuel a need for control. Without self-awareness, leaders shaped by this might create systems that mirror their own psyche.
Grandiose, maybe, but lacking empathy.
Yeah, potentially grandiose, exploitative, treating people or the planet as mere resources, because that deep human connection isn't their primary operating mode.
And technology fits into this how?
Technology, as the essay points out, is essentially an amplifier. It magnifies human intent.
So the intent behind it is crucial.
Absolutely. If the people designing and funding the tech are operating from that disconnected place driven by profit above all, needing validation, lacking deep empathy, the tech will likely reflect that.
Like algorithms designed to addict us, or systems that disregard privacy.
Exactly. Exploiting vulnerabilities for engagement, harvesting data without real consent, automating in ways that devalue human workers. But conversely, if the intent comes from a place of integration, authenticity, empathy.
Technology could be used for connection, for well-being.
It could. It could help solve problems, foster understanding, support human flourishing. So the inner state of the creators and leaders in tech becomes incredibly important, not just the code itself.
It really feels like this relentless drive for more growth, speed, stuff, profit defines so much of modern life. Where do the sources say this comes from, philosophically?
Several thinkers offer powerful lenses, discussed in the essay. Erich Fromm talked about society's shift towards valuing having over being.
Possessions and status over authentic existence.
Right. Our worth gets defined by what we own, what we achieve externally. This leads to alienation from ourselves, from nature, from each other. We become, as Fromm put it, marketing personalities, selling ourselves based on what's expected.
And buying things to fill the void.
Yeah, accumulating commodities or chasing status becomes a substitute for genuine meaning and connection. It's an endless pursuit because it doesn't actually satisfy that deeper need for authentic being.
That links to Viktor Frankl's idea of the will to meaning, right?
It does. Frankl argued our primary drive is for meaning. When that's missing, we try to fill the emptiness with other things, pleasure, power, wealth, frantic work. But they're substitutes. They don't address the core existential hunger.
So maybe endless economic growth is like a collective attempt to find meaning where it's lacking.
That's one interpretation, yeah. A society-level substitute for deeper significance. And then there's Ernest Becker's work on the denial of death.
That sounds intense.
It is, but compelling. Becker argued that our awareness of mortality creates a deep, often unconscious terror. To cope, we create immortality projects.
Like what? Building monuments.
Monuments, empires, huge fortunes, scientific breakthroughs, technological dominance, even dedicating ourselves to abstract ideals like endless progress or limitless growth. These things make us feel like we can transcend death, achieve lasting significance.
So the drive for infinite growth isn't just greed. It's fighting death.
It's a powerful psychological defense, according to Becker. It helps buffer that existential anxiety. But often, these projects ignore reality, ignore limits, ignore the cost to others or the planet, because their main purpose is internal to make us feel significant and permanent.
Wow, that reframes consumerism too. It's not just wanting stuff.
It adds a deep psychological layer. Sources like New Dream and then Elk connect this to materialism, focusing on money, image, status. Studies show we lean towards material values when we feel insecure.
Which links back to the ego and false self.
Exactly. And this focus on material things correlates with less concern for nature, for others' well-being. The history of consumerism shows a deliberate shift pushed by advertising, from needs to manufactured desires, often for things we don't really need.
Private opulence and public squalor.
Galbraith's phrase, yeah. Focusing on individual consumption while neglecting community, environment, public good. And we get stuck on the hedonic treadmill, always needing the next thing for a temporary hit of satisfaction, but never finding lasting contentment.
It's a powerful cycle. Personal insecurity potentially fueling consumerism and this endless growth idea, maybe even as a defense against mortality. But why do so many of us, even good people, go along with systems that seem harmful? Environmental damage, inequality?
That's a tough, crucial question.
Oh.
Social psychology offers some explanations discussed in the essay. One is system justification theory.
System justification.
Yeah, it suggests we have this subconscious motivation to see the way things are, the existing social, economic, political system, as fair, legitimate, maybe even inevitable.
Why would we do that, especially if the system isn't working for us?
Because believing the system is fundamentally okay produces anxiety. It's psychologically uncomfortable to think we live in a deeply unjust or chaotic world. So even people disadvantaged by the system might internalize narratives that justify it, like hard work is all it takes, ignoring systemic barriers.
It makes it hard to challenge things.
Very hard. Questioning the status quo creates discomfort. So we tend to default to believing things are basically fair, even when evidence suggests otherwise. We might believe unregulated tech is always good, or growth is always necessary, because challenging those ideas feels destabilizing.
It's easier to believe the system is fair than face the anxiety of it being unfair.
On a subconscious level, yes, it maintains a sense of order. Another powerful mechanism is moral disengagement, from Albert Bandura's work.
How we switch off our morals.
Sort of. It's how people can selectively disconnect from their own moral standards to participate in or tolerate behavior that would normally violate their ethics. It happens a lot in organizations or systems.
How does that work? What are the mechanisms?
The sources list several. Moral justification is one framing harmful acts as serving a higher purpose. It's for the greater good, we're defending freedom, etc.
Okay.
Euphemistic labeling, using sanitized language.
Right.
Calling bombing servicing a target, or layoffs downsizing, makes it sound less harsh.
Right.
Advantageous comparison, making your actions seem okay by comparing them to something worse. Well, at least we're not doing that.
Minimizing.
Exactly. Displacement of responsibility, blaming authority. I was just following orders. The Milgram experiment is a classic example.
Yeah.
Diffusion of responsibility, spreading it out in a group. It wasn't just me. I only did one small part. Anonymity helps here, too. It makes collective harm feel like no one's fault.
So no one feels accountable.
Right. Then there's disregarding or minimizing consequences, ignoring or downplaying the harm, avoiding information, not looking at the victims.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Attribution of blaming the victim. They brought it on themselves. Makes the perpetrator feel righteous. And finally, dehumanization. Seeing the victims as less than human savages, vermin, collateral. This destroys empathy and makes cruelty possible.
These are like psychological loopholes.
They are. They allow ordinary people to participate in harmful systems without being crushed by guilt or cognitive dissonance. It shows how easily our moral compass can get skewed.
That's unsettling, but really important to understand. There was also elite panic.
Yes, from the who we really are material. Rebecca Solnit contrasts the altruism often seen in ordinary people during disasters with this elite panic. It's not elites panicking themselves, but their fear that the public will panic.
Fear of chaos, losing control.
Exactly. Fear that the masses will turn into some kind of mob threatening the social order or their position. So during a crisis, they might prioritize maintaining control over actually helping effectively.
Like suppressing information or blocking local efforts.
Right. It comes from a fundamental distrust of regular people's ability to cooperate and self-organize. And paradoxically, this focus on control can make the situation worse. It's another way a psychological state, fear tied to status, can lead to harmful outcomes.
Wow. Okay. So, whether it's individual disconnection, collective defenses against death anxiety, moral loopholes, elite fears, there are some powerful currents pushing us towards this trajectory of external pursuit, often losing sight of connection and well-being.
It seems that way based on these sources.
But here's the turn, understanding all this, especially as a parent. It's not about despair, right? It's supposed to be empowering.
Absolutely. The core message shifts here. If these societal issues have roots in individual and generational disconnection, then working on those roots starting with ourselves is where the real power lies.
So how do parents start breaking these cycles?
The sources really converge on this. Because patterns get passed down, the most potent place to intervene is within the parent themselves. Healing yourself is helping your child.
You can't give what you don't have.
Exactly that. To raise connected, authentic kids, you need to cultivate that within yourself first. And it starts, according to sources like Inside Serene, Big Think, Taddy Morton, with recognizing your own history.
Understanding how my past shaped me.
Yes. How did your experiences, trauma, neglect, subtle messages about what was acceptable, cultural conditioning, shape your current patterns, your automatic reactions?
Like people-pleasing, or being critical, or struggling with boundaries.
Or needing constant validation, shutting down emotionally. Seeing these not as flaws, but as adaptations you develop to cope. That's step one. It allows for self-compassion. It gives you space to choose differently.
Awareness first, then healing.
Then the active work of healing. The sources emphasize it's possible and crucial. This means seeking support, learning new tools. Therapy, especially trauma-informed therapy, can be huge.
Learning skills, too. Like mindfulness.
Yes, mindfulness, maybe cognitive techniques like CBT, practices to regulate your nervous system like the grounding skills. Therapy in a nutshell mentions these help you manage triggers, tolerate difficult feelings.
Building self-trust again.
Building self-trust, challenging that ego-driven need for external approval, maybe integrating some of those shadow aspects you pushed away. Finding supportive people, surrogates, as Teddy Morton calls them, who offer that consistent acceptance maybe you didn't get is incredibly healing.
And reconnecting with the body. Gabor Mate talks about that.
Yes, crucial. Our bodies hold so much wisdom, gut feelings, authentic signals that we might have learned to ignore. Learning to listen to your body again is key to reclaiming authenticity. May even suggest illness or crisis can sometimes be the body's wake-up call, forcing us back towards ourselves.
And shifting focus to intrinsic values.
Right, the New Dream Source highlights this. Consciously building your life around things that are inherently meaningful connection with loved ones, purposeful activity, doesn't have to be paid work, community contribution that nourishes the self and weakens the pull of materialism and external validation. Connection, especially, is presented as a core antidote.
Okay, so the work starts inside. Healing ourselves, connecting with ourselves. How does that directly change how we parent our kids?
This is where it creates the ripple. The most vital insight for parents, from MATE, Heal NPD, School of Life, is the absolute importance of consistently meeting your child's core emotional needs.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love, loving them for who they are, not just their behavior. Being present, holding them, soothing them when distressed, responding reliably, truly seeing and hearing them. And this is huge, allowing their full range of feelings.
Even the tantrums, the meltdowns.
Yes, even the big, messy, inconvenient feelings, allowing them without shutting them down, dismissing them, or getting overwhelmed yourself. That's tolerating their authenticity.
Surviving their feelings, as one source put it.
Exactly. When your child's big feelings are met with your calm, accepting presence, they learn, okay, all parts of me are acceptable. My feelings aren't dangerous. They can integrate those feelings into a stable self instead of learning to hide them. You become the safe container.
And this builds secure attachment.
That's the foundation, highlighted by Forrest Hansen and Inside Serene. Secure attachment grows from that consistent experience of the parent as a reliable source of safety and comfort. It gives the child a secure base to explore from and return to. Consciously providing that counters those insecure patterns that might run in families. Attuned communication is key here.
Just being present, especially when things are tough for them.
Vital. Therapy in a nutshell stresses that having a caring, attuned adult buffer stress is critical for healthy brain development. Your regulated presence helps regulate their system. Small moments of connection add up massively.
It changes how you see challenging behavior too, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, Katie Morton in Therapy in a Nutshell frame acting out as a call for help. It's not badness. It's often an overwhelmed nervous system, a child in survival mode.
Communication, not manipulation.
Yeah, right. Their behavior is telling you something about an unmet need or distress. So instead of punishing the symptom, you try to understand the root cause. Learning parenting skills focused on connection and understanding development helps you respond effectively, not just reactively. Strong families, community support, these are protective.
And doing this daily grind of trying to be present, trying to understand, that's how you break the cycle.
That's exactly it. Cotty Morton emphasizes this. The conscious effort to heal your stuff, to parent differently, to offer that consistent emotional presence that actively disrupts the transmission of those old patterns. It doesn't just help your child, it can ripple down generations. Resilience gets passed down too.
So the path to changing the world, maybe it doesn't start with politics or tech breakthroughs. Maybe it starts here, rehumanizing ourselves, our families.
That's the powerful implication from the sources, yeah.
Yeah.
The essay suggests inner work cultivating connection, authenticity, empathy in ourselves is the most practical way to influence the outer world positively. Rehumanization starts within.
Maybe society is like a teenager, creative, energetic, but reckless.
That's one framing, yeah. Perhaps we're in a collective adolescence. The hope is for a more mature phase, integrating heart and mind.
And if our innovation, our economies, were driven by people coming from that more integrated, empathetic place?
The outcomes could be radically different. Technology amplifies intent. If the intent shifts towards connection and well-being, the results could be uplifting, sustainable, truly human. It's about changing the why.
It feels huge, but also clear. The path is inward, then outward.
And it's not about perfection, reaching some utopia. The essay reminds us it's a process, collective growing up. Hope isn't passive either, as the Who We Really Are source says. It's earned. Through effort, study, resisting despair, connecting, taking action, digging tunnels, cutting windows, opening doors, finding others doing the work.
And ultimately, becoming who you are. Back to Jung.
Back to Jung. Integrating it all, the light and the shadow, letting that deep, true self guide you. That inner journey, though tough, transforms us and creates ripples of authenticity in the world.
Okay, so to recap this deep dive, we saw how adult disconnection often starts with suppressing our authentic selves in childhood, maybe due to unmet needs or trauma, compounded by society valuing external stuff over inner life.
Right, and how this personal disconnection can fuel bigger societal issues. The endless drive for growth, tech, profit, sometimes driven by wounded leaders, and enabled by psychological blind spots that let us tolerate harm.
But the hopeful part, especially for parents listening, this isn't destiny. Healing yourself, understanding your past, getting support, reconnecting with your core self and values is the most powerful way to break these cycles.
And parenting consciously from that place, meeting emotional needs, tolerating all feelings, building secure attachment, being present, that's the direct intervention. That's how you stop passing down the disconnection and actively build a more connected future.
So for you listening, knee-deep in parenting little ones, that work you do every day, the small moments of choosing presence, of trying to understand your child's feelings and your own reactions, that's not small at all.
It's profound.
It's participating in this huge, needed shift towards collective maturity. It's rehumanizing the world, truly one relationship at a time, starting with the most important ones you have.
Couldn't agree more.
So here's a thought to take with you from this deep dive. Think about one small moment today. Where could you choose connection, choose authenticity, instead of falling into an old, disconnected habit? Maybe connecting with yourself for a minute, maybe responding to your child with just a bit more presence. What might change, not just right then, but down the line from that one small shift?
Thank you for exploring these deep waters with us today.